Speaker. Okay, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to bring you two new points of analysis from first opposition. I'm going to talk firstly about intervention. We're going to re-establish our reasons as to why this intervention is likely to fail. I'm going to talk secondly about civil war and long-term democracy. About how by them failing to wait just a little bit longer for the change that will come, they risk jeopardizing the chances of democracy in Zimbabwe for a generation, and why that's a problem. Before that, some rebuttal. So firstly, if he likes to characterize our cases, well, we're just going to wait, sit back, cross our fingers and hope for Mugabe to die. Perhaps he has a long life expectancy, but he's nearly at the end of it, Mr. Speaker. And more importantly, they are wrong to implicitly characterize ZANU-PF as a homogenous force. In fact, there are plenty within the ZANU-PF party who want to grow and want to work with Morgan Tsvangirai. We tell you that Joyce Majuru, the current vice president of the ZANU-PF party and a member of Mugabe's Zazero ethnic group, is one of the leading figures in this struggle. He controls the grassroots campaign of the ZANU-PF party. Currently, he's been zoned out of higher levels of government. But people like this, people who are high up in the ZANU-PF party, are in favor of reform. He's explicitly told the world that he wants a second power-sharing government, and that he supports working with Morgan Tsvangirai. All of these groups become polarized against further reform when you do something like this. When you invade, when you get rid of them militarily, that's a massive problem. The next thing she does is talk again about sovereignty. What we tell you here is that she seems to misunderstand Ben's point. We think this is a legitimate invasion, we just think it's a bad one, we think it's going to fail. No, thank you. The next thing she says is, well, the Zimbabwean army doesn't really have any money from diamonds. Firstly, false, at least according to our manifest. And secondly, no, thank you. What I tell you generally is the only way that Mugabe has managed to stay in power is by doing all these awful things to his people for decades, is because he's gone really, really good at war. He's gone really, really good at building up a tightly controlled army, no thank you, which is intensely loyal to him. No thank you. The fact that there exist opposition movements in Zimbabwe argues in favor of this argument. Argues in favor of the fact that even then he's managed to maintain control because of the incredibly effective military. The next thing they tell you is, well, the movement for democratic change hasn't had much buy-in, hasn't had much power in the no thank you power-sharing governments. First, we tell you they have a minister. We tell you things like the provision of services, control of the public services. These are not irrelevant things. These are massive steps forward for Zimbabwe. Again, things that you jeopardize when you endorse this engagement. No thank you. She tells you that, well, there's no support for the Zimbabwean government, and that's the reason why it's different from Iraq or whatever. We're not going to claim that there's mass public support on the part of the population of Zimbabwe generally, but another way in which Mugabe has maintained in power is by consistently enriching loyal ethnic groups. No thank you. His own Zazero people, who haven't done particularly badly out of his rule, at least relative to other actors within that state. These are the people, these are the reason why he's able to maintain control at the moment, and these are the people who will aid insurgency, who will continue to fight against invading forces, and will see themselves as losing out under any invasion. That's the problem, because quick, violent change is most likely to be opposed by the people who lose out. No thank you. She tells you about the message that this sends. What we tell you very simply is, one, we can send the message that we're in favor of democracy through other methods, like sanctions, like support for governments, no thank you. And secondly, that this is going to fail. And the only message it sends then is that we like to support democracy, but we're not very good at it, so keep doing what you're doing. No thank you. So, what am I going to talk about in terms of success? Firstly, intervention. Why it's likely to fail, building on Ben's analysis. What we tell you here is that African Union intervention has a long, and international intervention generally in Africa, has a very long history of failure. Why is this? For several reasons. No, thank you. Firstly, because often individual armies, particularly at the level of non-commissioned officers and soldiers and lower down commissioned officers, don't share the same incentives as the groups who are sending in the armies. Thank you. So, for example, a lot of South African soldiers get incredibly rich off the proceeds of Zimbabwean diamond mines in Monash A, I think that's pronounced right. No, thank you. So, on the level of individual soldiers, there's often incentive not to fight as hard as possible, perhaps to sabotage the effort. That's problematic. Secondly, because we see significant empirical evidence of home court advantage, something Ben talked about, on the part of African armies in previous interventions. That's why, because it's very difficult to counter people when they're dug in, when they're able to melt back into the communities in which they come, no thank you, when they just know the lay of the land better than everyone else. Again, we see empirical evidence of this. Look, for example, to the Democratic Republic of Congo, we're theoretically like technologically superior force was still mired in 10 years of dug-in violent conflict that killed millions and millions of people. That was one of the most horrific incidents in modern African history. Go.
On one hand, you say that ZANU-PF will fight tooth and nail to hold power and resist an invasion, and they have no hope of winning. On the other hand, you're saying that they're going to roll over and they're just going to accept negotiations or fair elections. Which one's more likely?
Sorry, like, there's no contradiction, right? We think, like, broadly speaking, the type of change that they are more likely to accept is one in which they work through negotiation and are able to maintain some amount of power, right? This is why people within ZANU-PF, you see that Mugabe and the extremists within that party have led that country to ruin, are in favour of negotiating with Morgan Strangler, right? Because they think they might benefit from a stable Zimbabwe and from a wealthy Zimbabwe as much as anyone else. When you go in and fight a war against ZANU-PF, and people in ZANU-PF are less likely to be happy, no thank you. What we tell you also is that the extent of support for invasion is important. What we tell you is that in particular, when a colonial narrative can be formed against invading armies who are associated with foreign powers, with potentially divergent interests to Zimbabwe, that's problematic. And at the very least, Mugabe's own ethnic groups have been enriched significantly as a result of this rule. So secondly, ladies and gentlemen, civil war and long-term democracy. What's the problem here? Several things. Firstly, we tell you that civil war is likely to fall along, when civil war takes place, it's likely to fall along ethnic lines. This is problematic for a couple of reasons. One, because when there's a war between different ethnic groups, you get ethnic cleavage between those groups. You get a situation where they're less likely to want to work together in future negotiations. That's worse when there's been a war and loads of people have died. Secondly, because those people who've been fighting against the invasion have also been fighting against democracy and against whatever institutions are put in place as a result of the invasion. That's likely to reduce their level of buy-in after the invasion works, even if it succeeds. Secondly, we tell you that a civil war where different parties are driven against each other massively problematizes any narrative of national unity, right? If people work together, if ZANU-PF and the Movement for Democratic Change are seen as having forged the new state together, people from all groups are more likely to want to support it. That falls apart at the point when you have a war and one side driven against another. Finally, you get the formation and emphasis of violent groups within the state. These are people who aren't going to go away after your invasion takes place. They're going to make democracy harder to make work. So, ladies and gentlemen, for loads and loads of reasons, Ben and I are very, very happy to applaud.